Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Women's Metropolitan Golf Association Swing Series. This is our series number 3 of our series. I'm Lorianne Cerullo, the president of the WMGA. In series 2 on Tuesday, we had Sharon McQuinlan, who is an LPGA, PGA teaching professional, talk to us about our golf fundamentals with our grip as well as our stance. And she gave us drills for the takeaway, the backswing, and the follow-through. Today, we're kind of dovetailing with that with Brian Harrington. Brian is president of Harrington Performance, and he's going to take us to the sports fitness perspective. His focus is going to be on the physiological way of looking at our exercise routines to make sure we have mobility and stability that gives us power to our golf swings. So Brian has coming to us with 15 years of experience. He is a TPI certified golf fitness specialist, a board-certified personal trainer, a functional strength coach, as well as a strength and conditioning coach, and also a corrective exercise specialist. So he really knows what he's talking about. And just before I turn it over to him, I'm going to let you know that everyone is on mute, and if you want to ask a question, please use the chat function, not the Q&A function, and Sarah and I will be monitoring that and will interrupt Brian accordingly. We will also have a Q&A session at the end with Brian. So again, Brian, thank you very much for doing this for us and giving us this information. I will give the floor over to you. Thanks.
Well, thank you, ladies, both for having me on tonight. So it is an honor to be here tonight. I hope everyone at home is doing well, safe, and healthy. And thank you for everybody who is participating in this tonight. So it's really an honor to be a part of this. Like Lorianne said, I've been doing this for a very long time, and there's always more room to learn for sure and to grow. So I'm not a know-it-all. I'm trying to learn as I grow as well. But I'm going to here tonight just to share some information that I've gathered over my years of experience. I am a golfer as well. I'm certainly not that great, but who is, I guess. I actually trained Sharon over the years. So she has been one of my clients and one of my athletes. So tonight I'm going to share, and there's so many things I could share with you. I mean, when Lorianne asked me to present, I was like, wow, what can I present on? How can I narrow it down? How can I really kind of hone in on certain things that really can be effective for golfers? Because there's just so many things that I can think of. But I did, after much thought, I narrowed it down, and I'm here today to present to you. Please try to ignore our home gym setting. We're all doing the best we can in our garages and our basements and our living rooms and all that kind of thing. I know it's a struggle. So, the thing I wanted to do the most is kind of give you an idea of what you can be doing with that limited equipment type of situation. Because I know everyone right now is talking about I don't have any equipment. Maybe you do. Maybe you have a full gym at home. And then you don't really know how to use some certain things or what routine to do. So this presentation is kind of going to range from having, nothing at all to everything you could possibly think of in your house. So I hope this helps. If you have questions, you can certainly, ask on the side. I think Lorianne and Sarah will get to those questions, and so they'll be able to relate them to me. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the very end as well. So with that being said, I'll get started here. I'm going to back up a little bit. Just make sure, maybe the panelists can make sure, give me a thumbs up. I'm okay where I stand. Okay, cool. So we are going to start by what is called in my industry the joint by joint approach. It is very important to understand with golfers, a lot of times, especially our general population people, we experience different pains, different discomforts in our golf game, in our bodies. A lot of times we're working at our desk or whatever it may be throughout the week, and now we're going to golf, and we're doing a lot of rotational movements and carrying our bags and things like that. So we feel a lot of different pain in different areas, and we have to start by understanding how the joints work in our body and where and what joints are meant for stability and what joints are meant for mobility, and that's where we can kind of start to isolate that pain and then start to fix it. So when it comes to the joint by joint approach, it always starts from the ground up. So our ankles, and I'm going to adjust my screen maybe it's a tiny bit, I think. Okay, my ankles are that first joint. So your ankles are a joint that are supposed to be mobile. Those are supposed to be able to move in different directions or whatever direction that is physiologically meant to move in. So the ankle is a mobile joint. A lot of times we have stiff or tight ankles. And we need to do some drills to loosen those up. And again, we'll get to those a little bit later. Okay. So, and then the next joint up would be our knee joint. So the knee is meant for stability. Okay, so we have mobility, stability. As we go up kind of our kinetic chain, that kind of pattern will keep reoccurring. So we have stability, we have mobility, stability, mobility. Okay, and here's where it gets tricky. So the mobility is the hips, the hip complex. Your hips are supposed to be mobile, but your lumbar spine, your back, your lower back is supposed to be stable. And a lot of times what we do, I think my head is getting cut off. I do apologize. I'm going to kind of readjust. Okay. So what we do is we rotate a lot because golf is a rotational type of sport, and because of our hips not being as mobile, we are stressing that lumbar spine. Our body's trying to find the next way we can create that movement, and we look to our lumbar spine, which again is supposed to be stable. Our lumbar spine is never meant for rotation, and again I'll get back to that in a minute. As we go further up the spine, we have our thoracic spine, or our middle of our back. Okay, in the middle of our back, that is meant for mobility. So we are supposed to be able to turn and rotate a little bit more in that part of the joint, that part of the spine, as we are in the lumbar spine. Okay? Then we get to the shoulder complex, and that again is mobility. Okay, and then we can kind of trickle out further, but those are the main joints we're kind of looking at tonight. So we're talking about the ankle with mobility, the knee with stability, the hip with mobility, the lumbar spine with stability, okay, and then the thoracic spine with mobility. So that is really important to understand, so that when we move and we have certain movement patterns, especially in golf, we understand what's supposed to actually be turning and what's supposed to actually not be turning. And that's going to help us, A, create better just function in the body, and then B, improve our golf game, okay? So I hope that was a clear explanation. If you have any questions on that, you can certainly ask. But let's go to the next part here, because now we understand what the joints are supposed to do anatomically. Now we're going to talk about what we call the stacked position. So the stacked position, or the postural position, just being in good posture. Okay, so that is something that, again, I'm going to adjust my screen a tiny bit for this one. That is having our body in a stacked, and our joints all in a stacked position, where posture we're allowing the body to become most effective in a postural position. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Let's talk about that. Again, it's going to be a ground up approach. So do we stand with our ankles over our feet, or our ankles not in line with our feet somehow? Okay, now that one small dysfunction, starting from the very first part of the kinetic chain, is going to trickle to the other parts of the kinetic chain as it rises up, because that's the first point of contact from the ground. Okay, that's our kind of our base. So if we don't have our ankles stacked over our feet, and they're not in line, there's no alignment, then we're going to start to create stressors up that kinetic chain. And I'm sure everyone's heard this kind of analogy before. You have a weak link in the chain, eventually the chain is going to break. So that's where pain and things like that start to take place. So we have to work from the ground up. Do our ankles stack over our feet? Do our knees stack over our ankles? Okay. Are our hips stacked over our knees? So do our knees come out? Do our knees come in? Is that all in line? Okay. Gravity's coming straight down at us. So if we don't have a firm support base, and something's not operating correctly, then gravity starts to pull on different directions on different joints, causing dysfunction and pain. Okay? So now we have our ankles over our feet, our knees are over our ankles, our hips are over our knees. Now here's a situation that typically happens. And a lot of times it happens because either we're sitting at a desk and our posterior, our backside becomes elongated, or maybe we're just kind of built this way, or maybe we have a little bit extra weight in the front side of our body, which creates a pelvic tilt. Okay, so is our pelvis neutral, or does it tilt? Okay, so once that kind of shifts, again, we become out of alignment, and our stacked position isn't as effective, which can cause dysfunction. So are we able to take our hip and kind of rotate those forward? They're not too forward, not to overextend, but are we stacking them over our knees? Okay, so I hope everyone can see that position I just kind of did. We kind of rotated there, and my glutes and my posterior are engaged. They're activated. And again, we're going to go over exercise that make that happen. But is it making a straight line? And then again, what we always think of when we talk about posture, the first thing everyone always does is does this, right? They pull their shoulders back, right? So it doesn't just start with this, but it starts from that ground up. Are we allowing that good base of support to now just take those shoulder blades and kind of, what I like to say, take your shoulder blades and pull them in our back pockets. So a lot of times what people do is they try to hike their shoulders, they pull them back this way. They don't really understand how to engage good posture, right? But if you take your shoulder blades and you kind of stack them not only back but down, now you're allowing yourself to create a straight line throughout your body, okay? And then the last thing is our head protruded, or do we have our chin neutral and tucked? Okay, so now if I have this position, I'm in the strongest position through any type of movement that I want to create. And obviously tonight we're talking about golf, so that's going to be effective for our golf game. So do we have to move in that position? Of course. So as long as I'm stacked, okay, I'm in that stacked position, I could still adjust my body and move, but everything's still in that basic alignment. So I hope that makes sense as well. Okay, and again, we'll talk about that further if you have to. So the problem we have is that doesn't happen for most of us. You know, most times we have some sort of dysfunction or imbalance, right? Whether our knees cave, our ankles, our feet turn out, or we have that pelvic tilt going on, okay, or we have rounded shoulders, maybe from working, because what do we do in life that's behind us? Nothing. Everything's in front of us. So we tend to, you know, be front side orientated, and we have that rounded posture. Okay, maybe a lot of times that new saying, that tech neck, right? We're always looking down in a vice, our head's protruding. So we are naturally over time just creating a lot of imbalance. Okay, now we go out to the golf course and we try to hit the ball as straight as we can, but we have all this dysfunction. We have stiffness, and we're not anatomically aligned properly. Okay, so we have to first practice that just stacked position by understanding it first. Are your feet over your ankles? You know, and I challenge you, if you're at home right now and you're watching this, you can get up and try it. You know, get your feet over your ankles, get your knees over your ankles. I'm sorry, get your ankles over your feet, get your knees over your ankles, your hips there. Make sure none of this is going on, but you're neutral in the hip girdle, okay, in the hip complex. Shoulders back and down, and now I'm a nice straight line. Now I can move and rotate how I want to. Okay, so that is the joint by joint approach. You have mobility, stability, and all the way through, like we said, and then we have that stacked position. So practicing that stacked position, especially if you are a desk worker or somebody behind a computer a lot of the days, is very, very important. Not to mention, as we get older, gravity weighs on us, so we just have to continuously practice those positions. Okay? So let's move forward with that, and let's talk a little bit about corrective exercises. Okay, I think your head's getting chopped off again, so I'm going to adjust this a little bit. So now, how do we fix these things? Because you can't just fix them sometimes by just doing this all the time. Now, being conscious of it will certainly help. I mean, I met a strength coach one time. She's now working for the New York Yankees, and we did a whole conference, and her whole presentation was be conscious of it. And we all of a sudden were like, wow, we're more conscious of it. Okay. Another thing I forgot to mention, let me regress for one moment if I can. Your feet. Your feet have to be activated. So over time and over the course of innovation and new technology, we started coming out with all these different shoes. And what did these shoes pretty much do for us? The shoe pretty much weakened our feet. So it takes away from strengthening our feet. So we have to learn how everything starts with our feet. In primitive times, we had strong feet, and that started with, from the ground up. So a lot of times you might find yourself standing and like you have no pressure from your toes on the ground. Your toes don't feel the floor at all. And that's not actually a good thing. We want to make sure our toes are strong enough to kind of feel that ground and grip the ground. Because when they're loose, you kind of become a little bit unstable. So we want to not really dig into the ground, but at least feel pressure on the ground with the toe. So moving forward with that, okay, we're going to get into some corrective exercises, ways that we can improve these imbalances that we have created via work and just lifestyle and time and things like that have taken place, okay? So I'm going to give you just three. I mean, I can get into a million of these things, and I wish I had a million hours to do it, but three quick exercises to do that would be very effective to correct the imbalances. Okay, so again, these are corrective exercises that are helping to change that movement pattern and that anatomic position that your body has kind of sculpted yourself into. Okay, so I'm going to adjust again so you can see me on the floor, because a lot of them will take place on the floor. And if you are at home and you want to do these while you're at home, by all means, join in and do them while you're home. Okay, so the first one is the glute bridge. I'm sure everybody in the world has heard about these before. Okay, it is kind of the almighty, and the reason why it's one of the almighty is because it's helping to activate our glutes and posterior. Our glutes are a major postural muscle. Okay, so your glutes are part of your core musculature, postural musculature. When you are sitting, they are elongated and they are not turned on. They're not activated. So they're not pulling you back into position, right? They are just kind of lengthened and they're letting you hip hike. But if they're turned on, they immediately turn that pelvis into that neutral position, which again goes back to our stacked position, which leads to a healthier kind of structure of the body. Okay, so the glute bridge is a simple exercise. There is a cue that I want to make clear that a lot of people overlook, and that is how to utilize your core during the glute bridge. That's the text. So what you're going to do is you're going to come down to the floor, and you're going to lay on the floor. And what I like to tell people to do is heels down, toes up, because that's really going to exaggerate your glutes and your hamstrings. Okay, so I'm going to get down. I think you can see here. Okay, and I'm going to give you a profile. This is the best way to do a diagonal profile. So if you notice, my heels are down. Okay, my feet are probably about 1.5 feet from my glutes. A common mistake could be too far or too close. Okay, so you're looking to get about 1.5 feet from your glutes, and they're about 1 foot apart each. Now, if you have like a band at home, a mini band, you could put that around your legs, and that's going to be an extra tool that could be useful, because the band is going to want to sync your hips together, and we want to kind of make sure they don't, and that's going to help activate more of your glute minor and your hip complex. If you don't have that, it's no big deal. Just make sure that your knees aren't kind of sinking in together. Okay? That's a sign of weak glutes and weak hips, and that's what we're trying to strengthen. So we want to make sure they're kind of apart the whole time. So again, I'm down here. My heels are down. I'm about 1.5 feet away. My toes are up. Okay, my hands are flat on the ground. You're resting your head, so you have a nice strong spine. Now, of course, what I'm going to do is I'm trying to drive my glutes up, squeeze, a good tempo. Tempo is really a good way to go. So you're going to hold it for maybe 2 or 3 seconds and then release. So I talked a little bit before about the core in this exercise and how to engage that. So a common mistake that people will make is that when they go up, they let that lower back arch. And again, in the beginning of the presentation, I said your lumbar spine is not meant for flexion. So your lumbar spine is stacked with vertebrae. They're a little bit thicker at the bottom of your spine, and the discs are a little bit thinner, which is an indication that it's meant for stability, not mobility. As you get into the thoracic spine, your vertebrae get a little bit smaller, and the disc gets a little bit bigger, and that allows for mobility. So we don't want to have to extend the spine during that, because you're putting pressure on those discs, you're putting pressure on that lumbar back, and that's what's creating back pain. So we're going to try to keep that ribs down as you put the glutes up. So everything's kind of pulling to that midpoint, that center point, right? So I'm down in here, and I like to breathe out, and I encourage you all to breathe out as you squeeze up, because the breathing will brace that core down as the glutes go up, okay? So one more time, I'm squeezing down here as I pull up here, okay? So do not miss that portion of it. Do not miss bracing of the core and pulling in of the core. Don't try to overextend your hips, because all you're going to do there is really flex that spine, and the lumbar spine is not meant for flexion or extension. It's meant for stability. Okay? So that's tip number 1. Sets and reps of those, especially if you're at home. I mean, we all are at home at this point, but especially if you're behind the computer a lot, you have to activate that posterior. Take a break, get down, do a bunch of glute bridges. It will help to just make your whole body feel a little bit better. Okay. We're going to get onto the bird dogs. These are the almighty golf exercise. This is like every golf expert will tell you this is do the bird dogs, right? And the reason why I'll explain to you. So bird dog first is hands underneath the shoulders, knees underneath the hips. Okay, so see how I'm right underneath. So I'm not here, I'm not here, I'm not out here. I'm making kind of a box. Okay, and that is super important because that's the base of support. We don't want to put added stress on the shoulder. We don't want to put added stress on the hip. Okay, so again, my middle is drawn in. Like I said before, if you're in here and you're flexed at the spine, that's a problem. We want to make sure you're not flexed at the spine, but you're drawn in. Okay, I hope everyone can kind of see how I just drew in there.
Yep.
Good. Okay, my toes are also down. That's going to give me a good base of support, and my head is neutral. So I'm not here because that's part of my spine. I'm not here, but I'm nice and neutral. And I'm going to take my opposite hand and opposite leg and reach straight out. Okay, so now what the common mistake with this is that we reach up. And what do we do when we reach up? Back at that lumbar spine. We flex that lumbar spine. We overshoot the glute and we go right into the lumbar spine. But by me pushing straight out, will just activate my glute. And I hope everyone can see how it just activates my glute and I come down, okay? And then it gives me a little bit of a mobility as well as a retraction in my scapula and my shoulder. So I show you this side, you can see how my shoulders kind of down, okay? And I'm breathing out as I extend, because as I extend away from my midline, I always want my core to be braced because I'm elongating it. We don't want the flexion to take place. So as I go out, we breathe out so it stays stable. Okay? So those bird dogs are something that are a huge tool. These things don't seem that sexy and that creative, but they're effective, and effectiveness is what you're here for. Okay? The last thing I'm going to do is talk about is some mobility in the shoulders. Now, there's a variety of different ways you can do this with different tools. If you don't have any tools at all, just the mobility drill itself is called YTWs. Okay? You have your hands. I'm going to adjust my screen one more time. This one I'll do on my feet. I'll have my hands on my side, my thumbs up. And I'm going to literally make a Y. Again, I'm pulling my extremities away from my body, so I'm breathing out so that I don't do this. So I'm not, the point is not to do this, going back to the lumbar spine, being stressed, okay? So making a Y, making a T, and then making a W, up into here, rotating back, W, okay? Again, the whole point is I'm not extending any of this. I'm trying to keep that stacked position, glutes engaged, Y, T, W. And that's going to give you some shoulder mobility work, okay? Now, I'm sure some of you at home probably even seen this done with a TheraBand. So you can get a band, you know, hook it up to something if you have that capability at home, and you can work light band. The worst thing you can do is see something that's too aggressive for you and then overcompensate using lumbar spine, using rotational work that we don't want to do. Okay, so everything goes back to our stacked position and then moving through that stacked position. Okay, so those are 3 corrective exercises that you could do at home. They're simple. Make sure the lumbar spine is not flexed, the rib cage is down and braced, and your hip complex is in neutral position. Okay, moving on. So now we have stability. Now we're going to talk about mobility. Okay, so we talked about the joint by joint approach and how we really concentrate on the stability of the lumbar spine. Now we're going to talk mobility through the other areas of the body. Okay, so golf is certainly a rotational sport. No one's going to argue that. You're swinging the club. You have to rotate, but you have to rotate in the proper places. So most of your rotation is coming from your thoracic spine and your hip complex. So if you notice when I swing, my hips are pivoting. And I'm no golf expert, but my lumbar spine doesn't rotate. It stays neutral as my hips rotate. And my thoracic spine, my upper middle back will rotate. So there's 3 quick exercises you can do for those mobility, mostly in the thoracic spine and in the hips. So the first one is just what I call thoracic rotation. Okay, so you're on your hands and knees again. Just again. I should have had a camera crew at home, but I don't. You know, on my camera crew, my little kids would be all over the place taking selfies. So we have our hands and knees position again, core braced. So you see a lot of overlap in positioning and different drills because those are the basic kind of stacked positions that we need anyways, okay? So we have our hands under our shoulders, our knees are under our hips, ribs are tight. I have no flexion in my lumbar spine, so I'm neutral. My head's neutral. I'm gonna put one hand on my ear I'm going to try to rotate under but I'm not using my hips. My hips stay pretty neutral. And then I'm going to try to rotate up to the ceiling. As I rotate up, I breathe out. Another way to do it, a variation, is you can kind of reach under, reach open, okay? And you're going to get reps of those. You're going to be careful not to really try to over-rotate or do it too fast. Everything's a pretty slow tempo because you're trying to create mobility. You're not going to try to really rip through it like it's some sort of HIIT workout. It's a mobility drill. It's meant to do slow and try to get range of motion. With each rep, you should breathe out harder and try to get a little bit more range for each rep. And of course, you're going to do both sides there, okay? That's for your thoracic spine. Now we're going to talk about our hips. So how can we get mobility in our hips? So we call them hip cars or hip circles, okay? So again, it's right back in that same position. And I'm going to create a circle with my leg and open it up. But what I'm going to try to do here is keep my pelvis, keep my hips neutral to the floor, and just try to rotate my femur inside of that hip capsule. So I'm not really trying to rotate open, but instead just bring up towards my elbow, out towards the side like a hydrant, like a dog on a hydrant, kick it kind of back up, back to my midline and down. So I'm really trying to minimize how much my hips are shifting here. Okay, and I'll do that, in both sides, just kind of loosening up those hips. You can do it both ways. It's a slow tempo. It should take you about 5 seconds to get that complete circle. If you're at the golf course, camera adjustment, if you're at the golf course and you don't want to do this, in the locker room, or you don't want to do this in the workout facility you have or whatever it may be, you can do it at the cart. You can just put your hand on the cart, and then just try to visualize, or maybe even put your hip against the cart so it helps you remain neutral, and just try to roll that hip open the best you can. I know I have a lot of limitations on my left side, so it's a bit more difficult. Okay, I'll come over and I'll just try to roll that hip. Get them ready and mobile and fluid. Get the fluid moving in there so that we have fluidity before you go up there and start backing away. Okay. Now you have your thoracic mobility. You have your hip cars for your hip mobility. Okay, and then the last thing I would say is your hip flexors. They are tight all day. So if this is tight, it's going to create that shift that we're talking about. It's going to pull that all day, and it's going to create a lot of tension on your lumbar spine. If we can get those loosened up and lengthened, that will be very helpful. Okay, so what we'll do again is we'll come back. I'm going to grab this pen, work on some mobility there. So we're going to adjust this. I have a pad. You use a pillow at home, whatever it may be. Okay, you're going to get yourself in a 90-90. So it is, make sure it's not out here, it's not out front, not too long, but you're in that good 90-90, tall posture, hips are neutral, okay? I'm actually gonna give you this one, I think you can see a little bit better. So my hips are neutral, they're not flexed, okay? So I'm already squeezing this glute, squeeze that glute, that's gonna immediately pull on my pelvis, rotate it, and then I'm just gonna kind of lean forward a little bit, and you'll feel a nice long stretch in there. Now some of us may be very mobile, and that's terrific. You might wanna give arms up so your whole anterior side of your body gets a nice long stretch. And if you're even, if you can even do that and that's helpful, you can grab the foot, okay? Or you can grab the opposite foot. You can put it on a box or on a bench and do it that way. That's a nice quad and hip lengthening exercise. So that mobility drill is really going to create space in the hip complex, which will allow for that mobility, which will not make you depend on the lumbar spine for the mobility. You don't want to borrow from somewhere else that's supposed to be stable. You want to make sure you improve the places that are supposed to be mobile, not borrow from a place that's supposed to be stable. And that's what probably a lot of us do. And that's why, maybe we can't rotate on the ball as well, or maybe we can't, or maybe we have pain as we get to the 12th or 13th hole, a little fatigue, or a day's over, and maybe we feel knee pain because we're not stacked properly. Now, I know in golf game, different instructors will tell you to stand different ways, but more or less, you still want that ankle over the knee and everything in line. So, those are kind of the basics. I'll readjust. So those are the basics of our stack position, our joint by joint approach, okay, our corrective exercises, and then those 3 mobility drills. And then if I had to get everyone at home, a kind of a little quick workout to do, nothing too elaborate, but something to kind of get your your body moving correctly. And again, this isn't for heart rate. This isn't for, cardiac output or anything like that. It's just literally for kind of movement patterns. I would say I would work on the hip hinge pattern. So here is two things that are very different. The knee hinge, which is a squat, okay, and the hip hinge, which is more of hinging at the hip. So a lot of times when we ask people to do like something like a deadlift or a hip hinge, RDL, an exercise like that, they do a lot of this. They keep going down. They don't know how to associate driving those hips back behind you, trying to touch a wall. So I would say work on something where you have a wall about maybe 2 feet behind you, stand in that stacked position, okay? And then try to slightly bend your knees, try to reach your butt back as your chest kind of leans forward, touch that wall, and be able to come back up. If you're advanced, you know how to do these things, then you can add load. So you can have a weight and do that with a weight right between your feet. Okay, you don't want that load to come in front of you because that's going to pull you forward, pull on your lumbar spine, totally disengage your glutes. You want to keep it close to your body. If you're someone who doesn't have that at home, you have a kid at home, they have a backpack, that's a weight. I do workouts all the time with kids. They have backpacks at home, okay? You have a purse, put as much stuff in the purse as you can, and you can use that purse to do those deadlifts. So that hip hinging pattern is a foundational movement in human movement. You need to learn how to be able to hip hinge properly. That's recruitment of the glutes. That's something like those glute bridges that we talked about before. Those are going to help you just perform and get in maybe that golf stance a little bit better. Some of us struggle or tucked or whatever it may be. So those things are really going to help engage. And a lot of power will come from strong posterior. So you'll be able to hit it even further. And that's always a good thing. The second thing I would say is work on some rowing exercise. So if you have something like a TRX at home, okay, I can't pull mine down, but a suspension trainer where you can do rowing with, or you have a band that you can hook up to something, and you're going to be in that stacked position, knees bent a little bit, okay, and then we're just driving the elbows behind us to create better posture. So we're trying to take those shoulder blades and pull them together, not hike them, but pull them, again, like I said, kind of down and back. If you don't have anything like that, what I like to tell people to do is get a towel, get a long beach towel. Okay, you can wrap it around the post of a staircase, get close, just hold it tight, try to work on that retraction of the shoulders, or even step on. I'm gonna use my sweater as an example of a beach towel, but if I had, my sweatshirt here, and I step on it, and I'm in a good hinge position, I just kind of hold that, pull, and I'm pulling my shoulder blades together. It's going to help my postural muscles come out of pronation and kind of get more straight up, okay? So I would say the hip hinging, rowing, okay, and then anything anti-rotation. So I know golf is a rotational sport, but in order to train the lumbar spine to be stable, we have to put an external force and try to remain stable. So what does that mean? Because that's a lot to say, right? That's something like if you have a band at home, you hook it up, okay? And I'm going to hook it up to here for a second. And I have tension on that band, and I'm holding it. It wants to pull me back. It wants to rotate me, but I'm not going to let it rotate me. And that's what you're training your lumbar spine, which I said is not meant for rotation or much movement. So you're training it not to move, to be stable. Okay, things like planks or side planks, it's teaching you not to laterally flex, but to stay stable. Okay, that's what it's really teaching us to do. So I'll work on those kind of core exercises to keep the lumbar spine stable. I would totally tell you not to do any crunches or sit-ups, because what are you doing? You're creating flexion in the lumbar spine, and that's exactly what we don't want to do. So sit-ups and crunches are like way out of the window. Like throw those out and never have them come back. I never have any athlete I train or golfer or general population person ever use crunches. It's just creating flexion. It's old school methodology. It's aesthetic. It is not functional. Function is stability in the lumbar spine. Get that through anti-rotational exercises, things like Pollock presses and band work and planking, and even the glute bridges. When you learn how to brace that in the glute bridge, that's a an anti-rotational, anti-extension, anti-flexion type of drill, core drill. So hip hinge patterns, learn how to hip hinge. Okay, learn how to row and get that. So if you notice, the whole theme is kind of that posterior, working that back side of the body because it's so deactivated. We're trying to activate it. So now if I'm activated, now I have my golf club out and I'm not rounded or I'm not flexed, but I'm nice and strong, and my posterior to hold me as I'm able to rotate, and my hips and my thoracic spine are doing the work, and my core, my lumbar spine didn't move, stayed stable. Okay, so just to recap, I'll bring it in. I hope we're good on time, ladies. Okay, we are talking about the stacked position, the joint by joint approach, and mobility stability. Then we're talking about the corrective exercises in our glute bridges, our bird dogs, and our YTWs for our shoulder complex. Our mobility drills, which is more of our thoracic rotational drills, our hip rotations, our circles, hip cars, and then our hip flexors, the front part of our hips and the quads, to try to loosen those up a little bit. They're tight, they sit a lot. And then a little bit of our workout. I hate to call it a workout, but things you can work on are hip hinging, rowing, and keeping that core stable through anti-rotation, anti-flexion, anti-extension drills. So those core type of things. So those are the things I would suggest. Fire away with questions. I hope
I actually do have a question, Brian. Thank you. And we probably have about 10 minutes for Q&A. And again, ladies, this is being recorded. But I have a question from Kyla. She says, I want to know your opinion on the over-the-counter orthotics. Are they better than inserts that come with your golf shoes, where you had mentioned before about feeling your toes and your heels in your golf?
Well, I'm certainly not an orthopedic, so I don't want to talk about the science behind things. I'm not a dietitian, so I won't dive into what you should eat, but what I would say is, in terms of my overall experience and my knowledge, that our feet are so underactivated. Of course, when you feel pain in your feet, it's going to start to trickle through your whole rest of your body, right? So correcting that from the very start is something that you really want to, talk to a professional about and improve on. I'm a firm believer in using and moving around without shoes on, if you can, while you're at home. And I'm sure most of us are doing that now anyways, but probably most of us are without shoes sitting. I'm talking about actually moving around outside and doing that. It's going to help strengthen our feet. Our feet have been weakened over generations and generations of increased technology in foot and shoes and things like that. Now, if you actually have, an issue going on with your foot and an orthopedic prescribes some sort of corrective insert, then I think that's obviously probably going to be molded scientifically best to fit the needs of your body biomechanically. And then I think the goal from that orthopedic is to get you back in that postural position the best they can with that foot position. But it's still and I think an orthopedic would agree, it still would be your duty and your obligation to yourself to try to strengthen your feet during your time, right? So without shoes and doing, toe flexion exercises and things like that. Great.
Well, we got a lot of questions, so I'll run through these. One question from Christina is on the reps. How many reps of each exercise that was shown?
I would say at least those are all corrective and mobility exercises, so they're not like strength building. They're not looking for power output, those kind of parts of the science. So with those things, we want to go higher reps. So we're looking for a pain-free 8 to 12 type of repetitions, maybe even 15. Doing correctly. So every person, every athlete I ever talked to was like, if you did 3 correctly and 13 incorrectly, then why are you even doing the 13? So pain-free and properly, you want to try to get, I would say 8 to 12 on everything, 3 to 4 sets, and take your time. They're not HIIT workouts. They're not conditioning workouts. They're corrective mobility, strengthening things that take some time. Slow down your breathing patterns, brace your core, things like that.
Okay. The other one, I'm trying to see which ones. What drills or exercises to increase the speed in the golf swing?
The golf swing, once you have that, once you have these things, you're gonna, first off, let me explain, you're gonna find your golf game improve immediately. So if you have increased range of motion in the mobile parts of your body, then your body is going to function more correctly, which is going to create more of that whip, right? So then your power is going to increase already. Now, if that is all working terrifically and you're in that position where you're mobile and those things are functioning well and you're stacked and your posture is great, then you're going to look for more of a rotational power exercise. So, for athletes like that or clients like that, I'll use med balls and we'll do some med ball rotational throws, or we'll use the elastic bands and we'll work on some power, rotations or a cable if you have that. Things like that from a rotational standpoint. And then also a healthy, planned out program of strength training will improve that as well.
Okay. Lynn Gear says, for the third exercise you showed, and I'm trying to remember which one that was, what size length of the TheraBand do you recommend? And it looks like you have a lot hanging on your wall.
So the third exercise, I believe, was the YTWs.
Right.
That you're suggesting. So that's our YTW. I mean, for something like that, you're going to need the bands I have here are actually not the TheraBands that are better for that exercise. The TheraBands are like this flat, probably 4-inch long. You could cut it and make different lengths out of it. That I would say you probably need about 4 feet, about 3.5 to 4 feet, because you need to anchor it, and then you'll need to have some slack to be able to, pull. You don't want that first initial pull to be like, okay, that's the end range of motion. Now you're compensating. Okay, you want it to kind of ease into that movement. So I would say from 3 to 4 feet.
Okay, so it's not a highly resistive. It's got some resistance, but it's not meant for.
Piece of paper. It comes in a giant roll. It's a TheraBands, they're called.
Yep.
You really can unroll it and just cut it accordingly.
Okay.
So these are more pull-up type bands. It's not gonna be as effective with that.
Okay. Someone said they had missed a couple things, but are weights important in the training versus the band's intention? Because you did a lot without it, and you had said at one point you could add it like doing deadlifts with a kettlebell type of thing. So these don't require
No,
weights, but you could add them later.
Right. So the exercises I performed tonight were merely mobility corrective exercises and suggestions of how we do it. I certainly like to lift weights, and I'm a strength and conditioning coach. 1,000%. You definitely want to, I didn't introduce that because I want to make sure everyone understands getting in that proper positioning first before you add load. If you add load and you're in poor position, you're actually counterproductive and you're just creating more harm on the body. So we want to understand how to stack the body properly. And then once you do that, I mean, by all means, man, that's what we're going to do. We're going to load the body up. We're going to create external forces on the body that are going to, stimulants on the body that are going to really have, a good physiological change in your body, which is going to help, grow lean muscle, lose fat, increase your golf game, no doubt.
Okay. The other one I have is in Pilates, there's a lot of roll downs and standing and roll ups from the ground. Forget them, ? Which I said, should we do it? Extension exercise, no good. They seem to be good or bad for back pain. So I guess the question here would be in regards to the versus Pilates on the extension exercises. Is there a good or bad and different? I'm a little confused about the question.
I am as well, but I mean, I'll try to kind of relate something towards Pilates. I am certainly not a Pilates expert, just like I'm not an orthopedist. So that's not my kind of modality of fitness. I know there's a lot of, bracing and core strength involved in Pilates. All I can tell you is from a functional strength coach and strength coach standpoint, a TPI certified specialist, is that I'm looking to try to, understand how to atomically align the body properly, create stability, and then create load after that. Okay. And then with stability, we can then start to work mobility, because you can't work mobility in the body or do things externally if you don't know how to position it in a stable manner first. And then we'll add the load. So again, with Pilates, I'm not so knowledgeable about that modality, but I know that there is a lot of bracing of the core and challenging of the core through extremities and stuff like that. So I think there's maybe some similarities to what I'm talking about.
Okay. And then the one question was, can you speak about shoulder rotation versus thoracic?
So your shoulder is your capsule, right? So your shoulder and your hip are both ball and socket type of joints. It's probably the only two in the whole body that are ball and socket joints. They're unique where they can move in every plane of movement. The thoracic spine can kind of do the same. So the thoracic spines are middle of your spine. So those things are going to work in conjunction with each other. So, if you have poor thoracic spine mobility, and this might be happening to a lot of you on this panel or like golfers, you're going to, what did I say before, overcompensate with your shoulders. And that's where a lot of that shoulder impingement and a lot of extra whip you're looking for will kind of chop down. Maybe you're a choppy kind of golfer and you're looking to, kind of fit that need through your next joint, but they should be working in harmony with each other. I mean, they're both mobile joints, and that's kind of the synchrony of like, the human body is like the best machine there is. So, in order to create a real great function is, get them to understand how to work together in sync, but make sure they're both functioning correctly.
Okay, thank you. Then I have two questions here left. Lynn Gear asked, she does a set of top 15 ab exercise with 15 reps daily. There are many transverse ab exercises in that list. Can you elaborate on the type of ab exercise that not to do? I know you hate burpees.
Yeah. So, burpees not an ab exercise.
It isn't, but I know you hate burpees.
So I just don't. So I'm going to clarify. I do not believe in training abs. I believe in training core. So the abs are an external, more of a superficial muscle. They don't really serve any function at all besides flexing the lumbar spine. The actual function they serve is flexion in the lumbar spine. And the only time you really ever flex the lumbar spine is when you get out of bed. So you never really should be flexing. So again, it's more of an aesthetic muscle really than anything. So I believe, and I train all my people, and this is kind of the science of the industry, is we want to train the core. The core involves a tremendous amount of muscles. I can't go through all of them, but it's that structure around that lumbar spine into our hips. We consider our glutes kind of part of our core. Okay, we're trying to create stability there. So everything with planking, side planking, anti-rotation stuff, dead bugs, we call them dead bugs, bracing the core, being on our back, lowering our extremities, but trying to keep the whole point is trying to keep the core where it's supposed to be, lumbar spine where it's supposed to be. So we're trying to create movement that will challenge it to want to change direction, but we don't want it to change direction. We're bracing, we're keeping it tight. So anything that's ab orientated is just doing the exact opposite. It's superficial. It's talking about not a functional really muscle. It's talking about more of aesthetic muscle. It's not going to, your abs are not going to help your golf game. Your core is going to be, help your golf game. I mean, we look back at some of the old golfers and they don't exactly have six packs. So, yeah. But they had strong core. You look at offensive linemen in football, they don't have six packs, but they have incredibly strong cores. So their function and they can use that for performance.
Got it. One question we have is, do you have a website that we could see some of these movements and some of these exercises?
So my website, unfortunately, does not. I have to be very truthful and transparent. Not have that. I could certainly, if you want to message me or reach out to me, we could certainly chat about certain things. So we could, I can give you these exercises to do, and then if you want anything further, we could certainly talk about that as well. But so I don't. I have to be quite honest. I don't. It's kind of loaded up with some other stuff that I haven't done in the industry, but no.
Okay. All right, so Lynn just asked a clarifying question. This is back on the abs. Many of the ab exercises are core exercises. Which specific exercise do you not recommend, like bicycle crunches?
Okay.
All right.
So core and abs are two different things.
Okay.
Two different things. If this is your spine, all your core sits around it, and your abs sit over here because your skin's right here. That's at the very end. So anything where you're crunching, sitting up, rotating, those bicycle things, those are things we just don't want to do. Those that they sell in those videos, they're sexy, they're infomercials, the guy's jumping around, he's got great abs, so I'm going to have them too, but they're not going to serve as function. I'm here to tell you about function and improvement in golf game. I'm not here to talk about aesthetics. Aesthetics is a whole different kind of modality that that's nice, but I don't do aesthetics. I do functional strength training, functional movement. So you're really to use the core. You're not going to flex. You're not going to want to sit up or crunch or cross the midline, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So in regards to that, then we did have a question with the website. So ladies, what I think we'll do is we'll get from Brian to list out the actual exercises he went through, because a lot of them are pretty standard and you could find them on YouTube. And then maybe we could, if we need to, Brian, we might be able to do something and put it on our WMGA YouTube channel.
Well, yeah, I'll even go as far as, look, certainly have time because we're all home. So I've been doing a lot of this stuff anyway, so it's a good time to knock this out. What I can do is I can tell you ladies, I can literally video and YouTube each exercise. It only takes a minute or two, and then I'll allow access to whoever's looking for it.
Great, Brian, we'll do that. And then ladies, also to let you know, Brian is offering, and you'll see this in our wrap-up session, where he will be giving anybody a fitness assessment where he can look at you, and he can do this virtually, or obviously at the right time and place, you could do this one-on-one next to each other when it's socially acceptable. And so we could do that, and he could do an assessment. He could tell you what kind of things to work on, and you can go further and draw up plans that would be particular to you and very specific. So he has that offer. I know for those gals in the WMGA who belong to the Pelham Country Club, you might be seeing Brian because he's partnered with them in regards to his sports and fitness programs. And then as Brian just graciously offered, and we will take them up, we'll get some of these actual drills on our website, and we'll get that out to you as well. So ladies, anything? I think we're done with our questions. Sarah, are we all done? We're all done. So Brian, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Ladies, we will be having this recorded and sent up to YouTube, and we'll send that out in the next 24 hours. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. Have a nice night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.